So the year I'd like you to imagine is 1982. Since most of you weren't here in 1982, I'll fill you in on what that was like. If your job is an IT manager, that's modern language for what was then called a manager of information services, or MIS. An MIS director, you as an MIS director, ran a computing system, the main concern of which was something called data processing, the original big data. And you ran a big room on a raised floor with big machines in it that cost millions of dollars, and you had people with horn-rimmed glasses and narrow ties and white shirts and pocket protectors that hired other people who did COBOL programming and hired punch card operators and so forth. And that was big computing. That was computing in those days. But what happened in 1982, after about 5 or 6 or 7 years of something called personal computers, or PCs kicking around from companies like Atari and Commodore and Osborne and Sinclair and Apple, was they were not successful necessarily in business, but IBM came out with something called a PC, its personal computer. And it had this new operating system on it called MS-DOS, done by Microsoft. And suddenly there were applications on these things that were business applications, ones that did spreadsheets, ones that did accounting, ones that did word processing. At a time when a word processor from Wang cost $50,000 and looked like a wash machine, you could get this as an application that would run on a PC. And so with discretionary money, PCs were starting to show up inside corporations. And now with your MIS director's hat on, what is your answer to the question, are you going to allow more of these PCs inside your company? And your answer, if you're a normal, conservative runner of big data in a company in those days, would be, no way. No, we're not going to do that. It's not secure. Personal computing is still an oxymoron. People don't compute. Business computes. Government computes. Defense departments compute. Large organizations compute. Computing is something only large entities are capable of doing in a serious way. And what happens over the next several years? By 1985 or so, no company that was large at all could get along without personal computing on everybody's desk. If you had a responsible job in a large company, you had an IBM PC or a compatible, they were called in those days, a clone from Compaq or HP or one of these other companies, sitting on your desk. And that put everybody in a position where they're doing personal computing in a serious way. Now, there's 2 ways to describe what happened with that. One is the typical, the technology moves on sort of case, which is, this thing showed up, it's useful, people are using it, fine. That's not the real story. The real story is that individual people acquired a capability that was formerly organizational alone and were able to do more with it, much more with it. And that proved to be good not only for the individual, but for the organization. So a development happened in the early 80s, which is that people got computing power. And that was a genie that came out of the bottle and was not going back, ever. That was a huge change. It was a sea change in the world. Every new technology for individuals provides huge change in the world as in capacity. What we can do is with our tools. We got this tool called computing. It was huge. So now jump forward to 1995. Now you're called an IT director. Again, in a large organization. MIS is gone. Data processing is a lesser term, though it's still around. And you're asked, are you going to let this internet thing, which has suddenly showed up, operate inside your company? Now, the internet had been known about for a while. A lot of companies already had it. Some companies already had a .com address. Some of the top-level addressing systems had already been applied. There were .govs and .aus and the rest of them. But for the most part, if you were asked at a large company, this internet thing, which is starting to take off, and now there are ISPs in the world, there's graphical browsers, there's open email rather than just closed email, the kind of email we have now. And you're asked, are you going to put this in your company in a way that all your employees can use it and that allow you to embrace your customers, because your customers now have it too? And you're going to say, no. You're going to say no because, we already have networks inside here. We've got Novell. We've got Corvus. We've got HP. We've got We've got we've got IBM networks. We've got networks we pay millions of dollars to large companies for. We've got applications running on those networks. There are our proprietary networks. We control them. They are secure because we have them. I'll tell you what, with this internet thing, we'll put up our brochures on our website, and you can come and look at the website if you want and look at our brochures, and that'll save us a little bit of work. But we're not going to really embrace the internet in a serious way. And what happens over the next several years? Well, the dot-com boom happens. First, e-commerce comes along with Amazon and eBay, and they start eating a whole bunch of other companies' businesses. And it becomes obvious in a fairly short time that there's no way that a company can get along with being off the internet at all, in keeping their employees off the internet or keeping their customers out that are coming in through the internet. And again, the story of this, the common story of it is, well, we have this new communication capability. The internet's here, and it makes all kinds of things possible. But the real story, the thing that matters most for our purposes here, is that individuals got a corporate power again. That was the power to communicate. They could now not only do international telephony, they could put on their own TV stations, their own radio stations, they could publish worldwide with very little effort, they could compose all kinds of things. We had desktop publishing in the 80s. Now in the 90s we had the ability of anybody to publish whatever they want anywhere. And so that capability, the ability to do anything communication-wise, was something that had been corporate, that had been organizational, that had been government, that had been big business, belonging to each of us as individuals again. Now, it's important to understand something about the internet that is also not often talked about, which is that it's fundamentally organized simply by a protocol. A protocol is a system of manners between computers or between nodes on a network. It could be a printer, it could be anything on a network. And what the internet did, what the internet's founding protocol, TCP/IP, did, was took every node in the world and put it a functional distance apart of 0. Nothing. All of us, when we're on the internet, even if there's a propagation delay, even if there's latency between here and North America or Asia or some other place, it's negligible. We feel we are in the same place at the same time with others. And that new capacity to be 0 distance apart without a controlling system in the middle is a new thing in the world. This is another genie that came out of the bottle and is not going back. The capacity for everybody to be 0 distance, functional distance from everybody else at 0 cost as well. We can impose costs. You're a phone company, you want to charge for data or whatever else. Those can show up. Nobody begrudges paying something for a service that provides this access to this thing, but the fundamental architecture of the internet, the social architecture, the real social architecture, not Facebook, not Twitter, but the actual architecture of the internet is one that puts all of us 0 distance apart at a functional cost that's nearly 0 as well. A new condition in the world, not changing, not going back in the bottle. So now let's go forward to 2008. 2008, smartphones had been out for a short time. Apple's iPhone came out in 2007. But in the summer of 2008, Apple came out with its iTunes store, a store where you could buy apps. They came out with an SDK that made it very easy to develop apps. Google was on the way doing the same thing with Android and more or less copying Apple's system but making it open so anybody could develop outside of one company's system. And now you're no longer an MIS director. You're a CIO or a CMO at a large organization. And people are now bringing their own devices. They're bringing in their iPhones and their Androids to work. And you're asked, are you going to let people do business on those phones where they have computing and communication, personal computing and personal communications, worldwide connectivity on these handheld devices that they own, that are in their pockets, and you're going to say, no, we'll give them Blackberries. All right? You know, you go to work, and you have two. You got your iPhone, your Android in this pocket. You've got your Blackberry in the other pocket. And why Blackberries? Well, the company could control Blackberries. They can control the email systems. It's hooked up to their Microsoft Exchange server, all the calendaring, all the scheduling, all the rest of it. And it was controlled. It's a corporate issue. You get your own phone. It can do some web work. It can do some other things. But what happens within 2 or 3 years after 2008? Now the company is handing out to their salespeople iPhones, not iPhones, but not just iPhones, but iPads and Android pads, because they're writing programs on these platforms for people to use. So what happened is that these two fundamental capacities that had been unleashed in the 1980s and the 1990s, computing and communications, those became personal, and then portability and mobility became personal. Now, once again, a personal capacity to do more with that than the organization could alone became a corporate asset as well. The company embraced these things. So now it's 2014. It's July 2014. And you're no longer an IT manager. IT actually has budget subtracted from it now. It's all going over to marketing. You're a CMO. That title didn't even exist 10, 15 years ago. If it did, 15, 20 years ago, you had a VP of sales and marketing, and it was always a salesperson, never a marketing person. Trust me, I was in marketing. Marketing got no respect whatsoever. Marketing is getting big budget right now. Why is marketing getting big budget? Because of big data. Guess what? Big data. Data processing. We're back in 1978 with this. It's very retro, okay? Big data is this corporate asset. Companies need big data. They're collecting it. They're doing it by surveillance with Google and a zillion other companies, picking up data from individuals, and they're going to crunch it. They're going to find out all about the world. There's lots and lots of really cool, legitimate things you can do with that. You can do it. There are industries like medicine, like mining, pharma, manufacturing, a zillion things that will benefit from big data. But the big conceit of big data, and the reason that CMOs are getting all of the budget for big data, is that there is this notion that with big data, you can super understand customers, and you can understand them better than they know themselves. This is a fiction that goes on right now, that you can know this customer, better than they know themselves. A year ago, IBM ran an ad. Meet the chief executive customer. It's a B2B ad. Meet the chief executive customer. She's now running your company. There isn't a single customer out there that feels like they're running a damn company in the world. Trust me, it's not happening. None of us feel so empowered that we're running the company that's busy trying to understand. So you click on Learn Here, and IBM takes you to a page that says, you can develop the million-point portrait of your customer and know them so well. There's nothing about communicating with the damn customer. You don't need to do that. You're busy understanding. You're super understanding. You get all the big data. You're going to super understand them. So you can do what with it? You can guess at them. You can guess at them. Go to any commercial website right now that's supported by advertising, and you see what that guesswork looks like. 99.x% of the time, it's off. It isn't what you're looking for. It's just noise. It's interference. Even the VCs in the U.S., guys like Fred Wilson, are now referring to advertising as pollution. They're referring to data pollution. That we've got what we're calling big data to a large extent is data pollution. Now, there's some small percentage of this is actually useful, but it'll be so much more useful if, once again, people are in charge of their own assets. So what's going to happen over the next several years, Annalise says it's going to be 5 years. I hope it's less. I think it'll be less here. We can go into that. Is that we, as individuals, are going to do with data what we did with communications in 1995 and we did with computing in 1982. We're going to be able to do more with our own data than companies could do with it, no matter how big their data gets, no matter how much they crunch it, no matter how much they try to understand us without our actual involvement with them. Okay, so this is the point that we are right now. Now, the work that's being done on this, I've been encouraging for the last several years through ProjectVRM. VRM stands for Vendor Relationship Management, which is seen as the customer-side counterpart of customer relationship management. It's $20 or $30-some billion industry, fine industry, but it's kind of the sound of one hand shaking right now because there's nothing to clasp it from the other side. All CRM systems are busy trying to capture and acquire and control and block in the customer. In the meantime, the customer just says, hey, I just want to get along with you guys. How do I do that? Well, there are tools coming along for that. And what I've done is basically Johnny Idea Seed. I'm putting out ideas into the world. They're saying, I know we need a lot of developers working on this, and the more developers, the better. Some of you guys are going to win. Some of you guys are going to lose. But in the long run, what we're going to get are ways that we can manage our own data and we can relate in our own ways, in our own terms, with companies and with governments and with each other that we can't do with them holding all of the agency in the world. So in the midst of this has emerged one particular success story that's in progress right now and why we're here in Australia, and that is the Respect Network, which Drummond Reed over here, and he'll speak shortly, has organized. And what the Respect Network is built around is the notion of personal clouds. Personal clouds are the clouds of data that we hold that are about ourselves. That may include our health data, our fitness data, all the data that we're getting off of our apps that right now, for the most part, are just going to companies we barely know. But when we start acquiring that data, when we start getting these assets, and when we can start communicating in a ways that we control with permissions that we have with companies we can trust and who trust us, we're going to get much, much better economic and social signaling between ourselves and companies that can learn from us than would ever be possible with the guesswork systems that are sort of prevailing today. So in a way, some people call this small data, but the real story is it's my data, it's my asset, it's what I bring to the table. And we need a framework to start working out how all the companies and all the services and each of us as individuals are able to do the trusting, to be trusted by companies, and to have normal ways of, for example, changing our address one time for everybody that we're dealing with. Here's a big one: getting rid of logins and passwords completely. I think it's 2014. Why are we still using these things? It's silly, but we're stuck in 1995 with client server, which is the original architecture we chose for organizing the web, which is. And we could go into this later if you want to do it in Q&A. But it was a provisional choice back then that we're still stuck with. It's a box we can't think outside of. Why do we actually need logins and passwords if I'm actually trustable when I walk into a room or I walk into a relationship? Why can't I relate in my own one way with many companies at once? So that's the thing that Respect Network addresses, and it's got its own protocol called XDI, which Drummond is the primary architect of or author of. Which has a notion called a facility called link contracts that allow us to substantiate the agreements that we have with the companies and the organizations that we deal with. And there's much more to it that I'm not going to steal his thunder by talking about it. But the main thing I want to leave you with is the realization, I hope, that we are right at this cusp of history right now when we're going to be able to do more with our own data than others can, and it will be good for others once we can do that. And that's the box that we need to think outside of. And one last thing, it is really interesting to me that this is really taking off biggest right now here in Australia and not elsewhere. Because there are three places right now where the activity is strongest, I think. One is the UK, where we were a week before last. One is France, and the other is here. But the biggest one, to me, right now, is here. And this is where it's really it's sort of like, actually there's a metaphor that Joyce, my wife, uses and likes, which is if you're going to set fire to a big wet log, start with kindling, right? The big wet log is business as usual, but you need kindling, and the kindling is smaller and the kindling is drier and the kindling catches on fastest. And I think that's what we're dealing with right here. This is where the kindling is, and I'm really excited about where it's going to go. Thank you very much.
Say a bit more about how we're stuck within this client-server mindset and how the structure of the internet today offers.
Yeah. Okay, first, the structure of the internet as a protocol is simply this point-to-point, peer-to-peer thing that TCP/IP defined. Client-server is an architecture that says it's based on this assumption, which is that the heavy lifting needs to be done by the server and the light lifting needs to be done by the client. And that made complete sense as an architecture when everybody was on dial-up and we had the first ISPs. And even though we could run our own servers, it was just easier to put all of the agency on the part of the big servers. And we kind of got stuck with that. So that's where logins and passwords live. Everybody's got a different server. Each one has its own login password system. It's clunky. It's old. It's a box we need to think outside of. It worked well with the web because each website has an address. It has its own server. We go to that place. We visit it. But conceptually, it's kind of like, it's not that it has to go away. It's kind of like Newtonian mechanics, but here's quantum mechanics too. These two can get along. They both apply. But we need to move our minds back to the larger context, which is the net itself, which is peer-to-peer and point-to-point, and think of our own agency as individuals as one that's much more native to the peer-to-peer model of the larger net itself than to the client-server model that we settled on in the early days of the web, and which still works, but is, it's kind of like, sails rather than on ships, rather than having, engines on board or something else like that. Or probably a better example is trains rather than cars. We need vehicles of our own where we feel we're in control. We don't have that if we're always passengers on somebody else's server. So, yes?
Dr. What do you think is the underlying driver here? Is it that we've always had a desire for privacy and that desires have to be sublimated in order to get the benefits of the internet to date and can now reassert itself? Or do you think that there is some fundamental change happening? Do you think that it's actually not about privacy at all, that it's about having a better, deeper, more understanding interaction with a supplier?
Well, two things. One is that the internet we know today is 18 years old. In terms of the history of civilization, this is nothing. It's still very early days. We're still working stuff out. That's one. Second thing is we've had 10,000 years to work out civilization as we know it, and that includes a very casual but deep and complex understanding of what privacy is. I'm wearing privacy technology here. I'm concealing part of myself. We have doors and we have windows. We have shades on those windows. There are manners in dealing with each other. In cultures where everybody is 2 inches apart, there's this concept called the Chinese wall, for example. We're going to ignore what's happening on the other side of the wall like I never heard it. These are conventions that are very well understood within those cultures that were developed over a very long period of time. With the internet, it was tabula rasa from day one. We've hardly begun to write on that thing. So I think now, second thing is privacy itself, I think, is an effect rather than a cause. I think we acquire privacy by our protocols, by our manners, by our behavior, by the ways we interact with each other, and it's something that we can assume is present even if in some ways it's not. For example, we have a thing called a Dunbar number. There's a maximum number of people we can basically remember. It's exceeded by the number of people we've said yes to on Facebook, for example, right? I met this guy at a conference. I don't know. He's my friend now. It's this weird thing, this new convention we have, but it's a temporary convention. We have inbuilt human capacities that need to be fully supported on the net, and they aren't yet. So I think we're just at the beginning of the time where we're starting to work that out. We can't work it out top down. I think we're going to have emergent properties of lots and lots of people working on lots and lots of solutions of which some are going to survive. And what I like about the Respect Network's architecture is that this is a framework in which we can easily imagine having that emerge. And I like Drummond's emphasis on trust rather than on privacy itself. If we can trust each other, then it doesn't matter if I know some of your secrets, you know some of my secrets. I trust you not to reveal them, right? That's a manners thing. But formalizing that at a technical level is difficult, but he's got a system for doing that. And I'm optimistic that is going to be one of the ways we can work that out. But we need many attempts at the same thing all over the place. Yeah, there was a question back there first.
Thanks, Doc. Steve Wilson from Constellation. You talked about a goal state almost of being able to relate to...
Talk about the what? I'm sorry?
A goal state. You talked of a goal state.
A goal state, yes.
Being able to interact with a number of companies all the same way. How many identities do you think we've really got? Well,
there's an early leader, and he's still there. He's an architect for Microsoft, is Kim Cameron. He wrote the 7 Laws of Identity back in 2004 and 5. Kim refers to himself half-jokingly as the committee of the whole, right? We have many identities. I'm Doc to all of you. I'm Doc to most of the world. I'm David to my wife, and I'm David to a few other people. I'm David to the administrative systems that give me my driver's license and my health care and the rest of it. And I'm Dave to most of my cousins and some other people like that. And that's just identifiers, okay? In most cases, I'm just in a person-to-person, I'm the second person pronoun. I'm you, right? Pronouns are how we make identity sane, right? What we call sanity is the ability that each of us have to organize our many ways of identifying ourselves behind one single, simple personal pronoun, I or me or my or mine. And those are all zones of control, right? Only I can say I or me. Only you can say I or me. This is one reason why when a company wants to say my on our behalf, it always feels a little weird. Why is Apple saying my stuff? That's not there. They're saying that for me. I don't like somebody putting words in my mouth. That's weird, right? But it's also experimental. That's part of the client-server problem, because the servers are doing all the work. They're saying, well, I'm going to have to use the first-person pronoun for you. So I think the goal state for that is that it's going to be unambiguous. When I'm talking, it's only me. When you're talking, it's only you. And how you identify yourself is your choice. And it needs to be a framework within which you can say, I'm going to a better example than you personally, but let's say you're a woman getting married. You change your surname, right? And you want to change your surname for lots of companies at once. And you should have one single way of doing that. One single, simple way of saying, I'm Judy Scott to this company, and I'm Judith Scott to that company, and but I want to do this in one move with a system that is mine alone. That's the end state. It's one where we have control. And imagining that is kind of like imagining a car, again, in an era when all we have so far are trains. We have a lot of liberty inside the trains that we occupy right now, but cars are what we need in order to feel full agency on the roads of the world that are described by the internet. And we need to invent those cars. In a way, what Drummond's created is a way to say, okay, we're going to be driving cars that look roughly like this. We're going to interact with each other with signals that look like this. We're going to drive on this side of the road. We're going to have certain ways that we trust each other. Companies trust us. We trust them. Can we agree on this? Good. Now let's all develop around that and see if this emerges as a standard. And we're going to learn along the way. Some things are going to fall off. Some things are going to get improved. There are going to be hackers out there. They're going to say, wait a minute, I really love what you did with XDI, Drummond, but I'm going to change it a little bit here. And he's going to say, oh, that's cool. That looks good. And it'll go into the code base. That's how the open source world works, and it's open source code. So I'm optimistic about that happening. The more people working on this stuff, the better it gets. That's basically part of what is happening in the world right now, that we saw a little bit with computing and a little bit more with networking, a little bit more with mobility, and now a little bit more with personal control of data. But we're right at the beginning of this. And it's very hard to imagine where this is going to go when our frameworks are all the traditional ones. And there was one over here, I think, yes. I don't want to look into the side of the room. I hate it when people do that, but maybe you guys are curious. So,
what role do you see governments and the public sector playing in this space, either as an enabler or an obstructor in this progressing?
I think our governments are playing a very active role. The government here is, for sure. And it differs a great deal. I mean, right now we have a lot of reactive lawmaking to the prevailing conditions of social networking and surveillance and a lot of other things like that. So as Kevin Cox back here has educated me on the subject of the new privacy law that passed on March 12th here, it's now incumbent on organizations to notify people when they're collecting data about them and then give the data back to them in a form that the people specify. That's very, very advanced as laws go. I don't know what the unintended consequences of that are either. I have very mixed feelings personally about lawmaking on this because most laws protect yesterday from last Thursday with something that's going to last for the next 20, 30, 40, or 50 years or forever. And often what happens with laws is they protect large companies from disruptors. In the U.S., especially around copyright, we've seen this. I mean, for example, you can't do music podcasting. Can't be done. It's off the table. Off the table. You have to clear rights with everybody separately, individually. Maybe you can work out a deal with some big company, but right now, Hollywood runs entertainment. They run it on the internet. They ran it before. They're still running it. The record industry is doing fine in a different way than it ever did before. Saying that they got destroyed by the internet is really wrong. They're running the laws on that. But with this new law in Australia, with some of the new laws coming along in the EU, they're protecting individuals from predations of of bad actors and companies in government. And I think on the whole that's a good thing. But every country is going to be approaching it very differently. Most countries that I visit or am somewhat acquainted with, and I don't want to presume to know more than I actually do, but the main thing I observe is that outside the U.S. in free democracies, Drummond said in the West before, but actually it's also in the South, tend to have a symbiotic model for business and government. We have high-speed trains in Europe. We have high-speed trains in Europe because business and government together said, we're going to have to work on this thing together or we're not going to get high-speed trains. In the U.S., what we had was high-speed trains. That's government. We're not going to have high-speed trains. Wait for the market to demand high-speed trains. We don't have high-speed trains. And we don't because business and government are sort of seen as opposed somehow in the U.S. This is a mythological weirdness that has emerged mostly out of the right that is at great odds with the rest of the world. I mean, there's this notion on the right in the U.S. that all government is bad and we need to oppose it, and the rest of it, even though we have large companies that kind of control the government, also weird. And on the left, there's this notion that all answers to everything is policy. This is one of the things I found working in academic institutions. Academic institutions tend to be filled with people on the left, and their answers to everything is they don't understand business at all, and they think government's going to solve everything. What's the policy answer for this thing? And the truth is, it's between these two. We need all these things getting along. And again, it's early days, and we're going to see how this plays out. But I'm much more optimistic for places outside the U.S. than for the U.S. itself. I don't want to. Okay, so somebody needs to tell me how many I answered before we let Drummond.
I was going to say one last question for Doug.
Okay.
Sorry, Doug. Just a thing on security here. You mentioned about the personal cloud. So we're going to be putting everything into our personal cloud. Okay, so what happens when someone hacks into whatever servers? You've got every bit of your identity. At the moment, they can get bits and pieces, and they get little bits, but take this to the nth degree, we now are not, it's out there. What do we do in that circumstance?
I think we're always vulnerable, no matter what. Matthew back here had his laptop stolen in San Francisco last week. It's got his life in it. If somebody could hack it in that, they got it all. It's all there, I mean, we're terribly exposed right now. I think we're far more exposed today in more ways than ever than we will be once the personal clouds are there. At least we'll have there something that we can control personally, and protocols and other technologies for getting along with people we trust, with contracts that are binding and that have remediation at least implied, if not built in, for when that trust is broken, and ways of tracking that and keeping track of it. And that's, I think, a much better environment for what we're now calling security in general than what we have now. What we have now is, for ourselves, that is an unbelievable degree of exposure. I mean, it's just huge. But because most of us haven't had harm yet, haven't felt harm, we're not making as big an issue of it as we are, say, with government secrets and corporate secrets and the rest of it. But I think all of us are exposing secrets of our own of all kinds in the world today. That's something that needs to be fixed. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but what happens when your identity is gone completely? So the question is, what happens when your identity is gone completely? I don't think identities ever get gone completely. I mean, the thing about stealing identities, identity isn't stolen. It's just being abused by some other idiot out there that wants to take advantage of the fact that your identifiers and can be taken advantage of in the world. We've had this forever with stealing credit cards and lots of other things. I think we're all self-defined, and I think that we'll, with personal clouds, be able to identify ourselves with the same kind of granularity in the virtual world that we have in the physical world, and we've had all along. So that's what I'm optimistic about, but we'll have to work it out. It's going to take some time.